Hello everybody, thanks for coming by. I'm very pleased to introduce Tam Mayer, who's a local food grower, I guess, involved with all kinds of things to do with food growing and agriculture locally, and also of the Auckland Project. So welcome, Tam.
Right. I'm just going to pull that slightly closer. I don't know how to, I probably didn't need to do that, but... Hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name's Tam, and I'm very fortunate to work for the Auckland Project, which means that I can almost kind of live my passion in my work, actually, which is an amazing opportunity. But I'm as much here to talk about, kind of my own personal, kind of what I'm passionate about as I am about my work, but it just happens that I can do both things at the same time, which is really wonderful. I'm going to talk just a little bit. I'm not by any means an expert, and I have a very strong... I know a little bit about horticulture, and I'm working on a farm project, which is what I'm really passionate about. But I kind of just... When I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking, why is it even important? Why is it important that we're talking about food? Why is it important that we're talking about farming? Why do these things even matter? I've been on a journey myself learning about this. So I've been a vegetarian for a really long time, and actually, and the reasons for that weren't that I didn't agree with eating meat as a thing. In itself. It was more, I was concerned about how animals were treated and about the way that we feed animals and the whole kind of system. And I realized that actually it's not just about animal agriculture, it's also about arable. It's about actually how we farm as a thing. And one of the reasons why I think farming is so important is because it's about how we use the land, and the land is intrinsic to our health and our well-being, and it's what we stand on, it's what we live on. And if you look at one of the major drivers of climate change, it's how we use land, and it's changes in land use over time, and the way that we have changed and expanded our use of land over time. And interestingly, about 30% of our greenhouse gases come from direct changes in land use. 70% of the land in this country is used for agriculture. So actually, agriculture and farming and horticulture as well, and I include horticulture because I know a little bit about that as well, is a huge driver of climate change. And it's not just climate change. So climate change is one issue that we're facing, but it's interlinked with so many others, and I think it's equal with so many others. So it's linked with pollution of all kinds, the way that we treat our watercourses and the way that we treat our air. And it's also about biodiversity. So it's about the animal and the plant life that we share our planet with, and how we're treating those things, and how getting food to our plate is having an enormous effect on our land. And the more that I think about it and the more that I learn about it, the more I realize that when we talk about land, we're not really talking about land, we're talking about soil. And it's actually soil that is the foundation. And the way that soil is treated is directly responsible for everything that will then grow on top of that soil. So if your soil and your soil life is not good, then the plants that grow in that soil will not be good. And then the animals and the insects and the life that lives on those plants will also not be good. And it's a very we live in an age of kind of scientism where this kind of reductionist science says that you have to be able to prove that. But I think most of us here, I don't think you need a scientist to tell you that what we're doing isn't quite right. I think we can all feel it. And I think if you have, if you have a little bit of understanding, or even just a kind of intuition or sense in your gut that maybe there's something wrong with the way that we are treating the land, and that maybe that is having some wider kind of detrimental benefits to us and to all sorts of things. So, and as if that wasn't enough of an issue with the way that we produce food, there's all the other things that are involved in the process, and I think it is a process of food. So there's how we move food from one place to another, and there's transport, how we package food, which generally is plastics, and then there's the whole processing of food itself. So a lot of, I don't know, this might be a very, a lot of the stuff that you get in supermarkets, there's not very much food in it. There's a lot of additives in it. There's a lot of flour and sugar and salt, and there's a lot of additives in it. But actually, the kind of the food or the nutritional content of it is actually small. So there's this whole industry that's built up around our food, and it is a very fossil fuel intensive industry. Transport, then you've got the waste of packaging, which is generally just thrown away when we get it home. And so there's the whole gamut of kind of issues surrounding food. So it's something that we all do. You know, I've got a colleague at work, Charlotte. Food is her. She's very, very passionate about food. And she thinks it's a great way of connecting people, and it is, because we all do it. We all have to eat in order to survive. And if there's one thing that I would just like everybody to think about, and I suppose what I would really like to say is that if we could just think a little bit more, even think a little bit about where our food comes from and what the kind of wider impact of that is, because we all need to eat to survive. And how can we eat better? How can we farm better? How can we manage our lands and look after our soils in a better way? I think that's a really interesting and an exciting question, and it's one that I'm fortunate enough to be able to be kind of working on with the project that I'm doing for the Auckland Project, which is great. I want to talk a little bit about, this isn't perhaps the most coherent talk I've ever done, I've got to say, but I'd like to talk just a little bit about some of the limitations of modern agriculture. So I've worked with, and I'm working with farmers at the moment, and it's really interesting. I've not really been involved with the farming community at all, so I know there's a lot of negativity and a blame in the fact that, oh, farmers are doing it wrong, or farmers have caused this problem. But I think actually it's that's not true. It's patently not true, because a lot of the farmers I've talked to really care about what they're doing, but they've been steered in a direction. And that's really happened since kind of World War II, and this kind of drive towards it's a very interesting story, but to drive towards greater and greater production of food. Actually, it's a myth that we need to produce more food. We already produce enough calories in the world to feed about 14 billion people, which is almost double the current population. So we don't need more food. What we need to do is better distribute and better look after the food and the food supply chains that we have, and make them shorter, make them more localized, and distribute food in a better way, and make sure that it's easily accessible for people and it's not wasted. But this myth of needing to produce more food has meant that we have done many, many things. So we're genetically modifying our crops to make them more and more productive. But at the same time, they require more and more food in order to be more and more productive. So what we're then doing is creating artificial fertilizers. So we're adding these to the soils, and essentially, it was one time explained to me, and I quite like this, although it's a slightly ugly kind of metaphor, that our soils now are almost like drug addicts. They're addicted, our soils, to nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Aside from the fact that plants need a whole host of nutrients, we have over decades been adding all of these artificial nutrients into our soil. A lot of them don't stay in the soil, a lot of them aren't available for plants to come up, a lot of them run out into the rivers. I know Mick was talking earlier about, blue-green algae in the rivers, and we know that one of the processes that increases that is eutrophication, which is excess nitrogen and minerals that are running off the fields into the water. So these things are all interconnected. And our soils, it's very interesting that we think that we can add chemicals to our soils and that will make our soils better. But actually, by adding chemicals to our soils, we're actually destroying this most beautiful universe of life that has been evolving, actually, for millions, if not, I think, billions of years. And this really intricate system is being damaged quite significantly by how we're treating it, we're basically adding drugs to it, and it's not responding well, because it wouldn't. It's this very, very carefully, beautifully biological thing. There's a guy I really like called Walter Yaney, who's wonderful, and I recommend anybody looking into his work. He's an Australian soil scientist, and he talks about soil as a cathedral, which I think is very pertinent. But he talks about the structure of soil, and actually most of soil is space. And within that space, this amazing world basically happens, and water is held, and air is held, and minerals and nutrients are held, and plant roots go through, and animals and fungi and bacteria all live in this amazing universe. I think of it as a universe or a cathedral of soil. I think that's a really lovely metaphor. So modern agriculture has kind of seen the soil basically as this inert thing, this dead thing, and we'll just add more and more stuff into it. And the other thing about soil is it's intrinsically full of life, and we tend to want to kill any of that life that competes with our plants. So if you've got a plant growing next to your sweet corn or your wheat, and you don't like that plant, we call it a weed. And this is common parlance, and as a gardener, I've called plants weeds for ages, but I've never thought about how that language changes what is actually a wonderful plant into being something that you think, oh, we need to take that out, or worse still, we need to kill it with a herbicide. And then you have this amazing array of bacteria and fungi in the soil, the vast majority of which are very helpful, very useful, serve a really, really wonderful purpose, and yet because there are one or two that are pathogen, so can be dangerous, we basically apply blanket fungicides or bactericides, insecticides, which kill everything. They don't just kill the one or two bad things you might want to kill, they actually kill the whole amazing diversity of the bacteria and fungi. And it misses the point that actually bacteria and fungi, and to a certain point insects, they can't really attack, or they can't do vast damage to plants that are healthy, because plants have all sorts of wonderful mechanisms for fending off insect or bacteria attack. And it's the way that we have grown plants and the fact that we can no longer grow healthy plants because they're basically being injected with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the plants themselves are not naturally healthy, and so they are much more susceptible to bacterial or fungal attacks that they would usually fight off. There's a very good reason why weeds are so successful. And it's precisely because they've not been changed by humans, and that they are very much adapted to the specific environment in which they're in. So we can learn a lot, actually, from that. And it seems to me a no-brainer that we should be looking at the way nature does things and working with that. So we have the situation with modern agriculture. There's another, I'd like to recommend people that have inspired me. So there's an American farmer called Gabe Brown. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. He's written a wonderful book called Dirt to Soil. And basically he makes this distinction between dirt, which is what the Americans call soil, and it is the lifeless thing, and the soil itself. And I'm not sure where I was going with that. But he talks about, and he practices something called regenerative agriculture. And there is a whole network, actually, of alternatives to modern mainstream agriculture that we're currently doing. And the same goes, actually, for horticulture. And it's leading me on, I think, to the point, how can we do something better? So, okay, we might, some of you might agree with me, and some people hopefully will agree with me that we could probably do something better, even if we have got quite a good system now, which I would like to argue about, but we could probably do it better. And how can we do it better? And there are so many things, and there are so many existing ideas that we have, and I just was writing a few down. So organic farming is a system of farming that looks to try to do something better. It puts the heart of the farming with the soil, which is really good. Biodynamics, so some of you might have heard of biodynamics in horticulture and agriculture. Again, I think it's fascinating, and I think I don't know anything about quantum physics, but I was listening to a podcast about quantum physics and the realization that the observer, so the person observing the experiment, actually has an effect on the experiment itself. And one of the things that I always thought was fascinating about biodynamics is the idea that even the direction, it's just one of the things I remember in my mind, that the direction that you stir the water before you water the plants has an effect on the way that water is then taken up and used in the plants. And I think it's really fascinating that something that perhaps we would think about as being kind of somewhat magical or very counterintuitive, that something like that might make a difference, is now actually, in terms of hard science, albeit the most progressive edge of science, is actually now coming to see that there is actually some reason for thinking that this might actually occur. And I think that's just really fascinating. And it's just an aside on biodynamics, because I think it's very interesting. Permaculture, which is, again, something that I really love permaculture. I love permaculture because it doesn't just think about the individual idea of soil and growing. It situates it in a much wider context. And to be honest, I think we do need to situate things in a much wider context. Everything is interconnected, and the way that we think about things, and even the language that we use to describe things, I think has a really powerful effect on how we visualize and frame the world. So I think all of these things are really important. I've just got an allotment myself, which is very exciting, and having a compost heap is like my biggest joy of this year. I've just made myself a compost heap. I've actually been saving my food scraps for years and giving them to somebody who has a compost heap, because I don't have space, but now I've got my allotment, I've got my compost heap. It's wonderful. So I'm practicing no dig. And I was just having a chat to the lady at the back about how sheep's wool is actually really, really good for a mulch on no dig. So I'm thinking I might have to look into that a bit more. So actually, we already have, we already have come up with lots and lots of wonderful ideas. And actually, I think if we look to the past, there's a lot of things that we have done, and there was a lot more wisdom, actually, I think, in how we farmed prior to kind of industrial methods that I think we can learn a lot from. And also, we have the best teacher out there, which is nature, and how natural ecosystems have regulated themselves and have evolved to cope with so many different situations. So I think that, we already have, I think, all the information and the tools that we need. We just need to actually take that step, actually, and move forwards. And I guess I've spoken for far too long. I think I was going to do like 5 minutes. I find this happens when I start talking about the farm. I just can't shut up. Usually I'm quite quiet, although you might not believe it, but it's true. So I will just move on very quickly to the project that I'm working on with the Auckland Project, and which is actually at Binchester Hall Farm. And we are looking to set up what we're calling a regenerative farm project. So regenerative farming is just another one of these wonderful array of ideas. And without going into too much detail, it's simply, I think the way that I would like to describe it is it sees the farm not as something that's imposed upon the landscape, but it envisages the farm and the farming as part of the ecosystem. And that's its kind of core value. So it's not something that we do to something. It's part of this wider whole. And how do we manage our animals as part of the wider whole? And there was something I was talking to someone about earlier, Mick, I think it was, from the Weir Rivers Trust. We can't remove, and we shouldn't want to remove, human beings from the equation. We are part of nature, but we have to then accept that we have a duty and a responsibility, and we are blessed to have self-awareness, perhaps more than any other creatures in the world. So we can actually understand how we're affecting our biosphere and do something about it. And we should want to do something about it, and we should accept that we can be good managers, and how can we best manage and best steward our land. And so at Binchester Hall Farm, we're looking at transitioning the farm from where it is now, and it's pasture, so it's basically cattle and sheep. And how can we manage our cattle and sheep in a better way? How can we change the way that we graze the cattle and the sheep? And it's drawing on some quite new and recent kind of thinking in evolutionary biology and ecology, which looks at the way that grass and ruminants or herbivores co-evolved, and how you can graze the grass to a certain extent and keep it healthy. And you can, if you better manage the grass by managing the cattle in a different way, then you can increase the health of the soil, you can increase the health of everything that grows in the soil, everything that then, so all the plants and then all the animal life that's then attracted and works with those. So that's the kind of foundation of what we're doing. And that, as I was talking about at the beginning, that using the soil as the foundation means that you can start to, it's really magical when you think about it. You can start to manage a lot of the issues that we're going to have. So excess rain, which currently, if you ever go out when it's been raining and you look at the fields, particularly arable fields, you'll probably see enormous reservoirs in them, and if they're not just holding the water in big pans, the water's just draining off them and onto the roads. That shouldn't be happening, because healthy soil is quite capable of absorbing all that water and filtering it through to our river systems. So once you start looking after your soil, you start changing the way that the water cycle and the way that water flows through the landscape. So you start to be able to mitigate a lot of issues that we have with flooding or with drought. It helps and improves the quality of the meat that you're eating, and if you're growing crops, it improves the nutrient quality of the crops that you're eating. Hopefully it improves biodiversity in terms of soil life and the life above the soil, and that in turn helps us. If we're eating better quality food, we are healthier as a people, which is also really important. And it captures carbon. Great, so I think sometimes we get too single-focused on climate change, and climate change is massive. It's really, really important, but there's multiple other things that are going on here that are equally as important, and biodiversity, and they are all linked together. But yeah, if you have good quality cathedrals in the soil, the space for capturing the carbon is increased enormously, and that carbon that's captured in the soil is then used and becomes part of the natural carbon cycle. We are all carbon-based organisms. Without carbon, we'd all be dead. So we're made of carbon. So it's simply an imbalance in the cycle, and if we can start to help restore that balance by some of the ways that we farm and we look after our soil, we can do something to help. We still need to reduce fossil fuel use, but we can start to absorb some of the excess carbon that we've put into the atmosphere and be part of the solution, which I think is all anyone can ask, really. And the last thing that I do want to say, and it's really important, is the farm is about community. The farm should be at the heart of the community. Food and food production and farming should be at the heart of the community, because we all need it in order to survive. Even if we don't want to be a farmer ourselves, or we don't want to grow our own food, to have that process and to know that process and to know the person who's growing your food is really important, and I think should be a foundation of community, actually. So part of the farm project, and a big part of it, and something is very close to my heart, is how do we share what we're doing with the farm with as many people as possible, and share the ideas and get people, and young people especially, back onto the land and linked to their food and learning about nature and all of those things. So the farm is very much hopefully going to be a place where all of that can take place, where learning can take place, where people can be inspired, where we can add information to the scientific canon as well. So we want to record our data. So we are doing monitoring of our water, our carbon, and our plant diversity, and we're measuring that over time. And but also, again, I was just looking at the lady who's making those wonderful things out of the wool, and just the magical powers of wool as a fibre and what it can do. So also, it's a place where we can start to kind of be quite artistic and bring craft in, and these kind of ideas of skills and skills of making things out of wool, and perhaps start to kind of have a bit of a renaissance for some of these old fibres and these natural products, which are just, I think, so much better for us, and are just a natural part of the farming process that we're going to be doing. So why not use them, and why not make the most of all these natural materials? So so all of that is also encompassed in the farm. And hopefully that made some sense. And that's it. Thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you so much.
I agree absolutely, 100% with what you said, and good luck to you with the project.
Thank you.
I'm also, you said you've just taken on an allotment. I've had an allotment for a while, and a lot of the things that you're talking about have dawned on me, and my approach to the allotment is changing. And although I've grasped these ideas, other allotment holders haven't necessarily, and if they were to look at my plot compared to their neatly managed plots, they see mine as a haven for weed seeds rather than a wildlife thing. It's wondering how we can get that message out to more people to understand, and indeed whether the allotment teams are have you get in touch with the allotment groups and getting this message out to everyone that these neatly manicured little oases are not necessarily a good thing.
No, I agree. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say. And I'm well aware that my own mind, when my allotment currently is looking much more like a very traditional allotment. And every time I pull a weed out, I'm reminding myself that actually I'm pulling out a part of the life of the soil. But I can't quite. So it's that's one of the, I would say that's one of the kind of key questions and key kind of challenges, is because it's not about, it's changing your mind. And something is very deeply embedded in your mind that it's always been done that way. And so, it's a bit like, if it's not a bit of a terrible thing to say, it's a bit like the Queen. We've all been here, and the Queen has always been here, and we haven't even recognised how her being there has kind of infiltrated our lives, and we've only been made aware of it now that it's changed, and stamps will have to change, and letters on post boxes and things that you don't, and QCs have become KCs, but it's like that. Our minds become very accustomed to something and we don't even see it, and then to make a change is a very difficult thing. And if everybody's doing it one way and you do it a different way, they're always going to think you're crazy. But I think there's something about the way that change happens, isn't there? And you're always going to be seen as being a bit crazy at first. There's a I can't remember what it is, but first of all, basically, change makers, you dismiss them, then you just say that you make fun of them or you dismiss them, but eventually the change is adopted and everybody just takes it as normal, and you move on. So fingers crossed it will go through that pattern, but I don't know if it will.
You made that point about how we have enough food to feed everyone, and we need to distribute it more fairly. We also know that because of climate change, we're increasingly going to see at least local crop failures in many parts of the world. Is there a contradiction there with some of the things you were saying about food being based around the local community? Does that mean we need to keep some sort of global distribution system so that local areas can be secure if their own crops fail?
Yeah, probably. As some kind of transition in the short term, I would say that we're going to have to think about that. And because we've done so much damage, so there's going to need to be a lot of repair done to the soils. And yeah, so I absolutely, and I have no idea how we do that, but I think there needs to be a transition. I mean, obviously we can't just stop doing what we're doing. There's this whole infrastructure around that. But yes, I mean, I think it's a very pertinent point. And I think there's so many things that could be part of that. So people learning to grow food in their own backyards, and then using ways that are more in tune with nature. And we can, if we save our seeds, as the lovely Saskia is doing at the top, we can save seeds that are then really intimately in tune with its local conditions, and then will be more resilient over time. And I think, so I think you're right. I think there's going to be some need for some transition, and there will be a need. And we can't grow bananas in this country, but would we want to give up bananas? I don't think so. So absolutely, I think there needs to be a way, there still needs to be a market with things that we can't grow here. But I think Colin Tudge, who's the founder of the Oxford Real Farming Conference, he talks about not self-sufficiency. So we shouldn't aim for self-sufficiency, because that's reasonably impossible, but self-reliance. So we should be able to, as much as we can grow here, we should grow here. And then if we need to bring bananas over, from Costa Rica or whatever, okay, let's do that, but let's do it in the most, obviously, in a way that's as ecologically sound as possible. Yeah, so maybe that's an answer. I'm not sure.
It's moving away from monoculture as well, so that instead of having fields of the same crops, you have a diverse range of crops in the same field, which benefits not only the plants and the insects, but but everybody really. There's less need for pesticides, and it's more productive in the long run because one will feed the other and look after the other. It's parent planting and that kind of thing needs to be explored.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, Jackie, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, you said it all really, by the diversity. And I heard it put recently that the reason that biodiversity is so good is because nature has a lot of redundancy built into it. So it's like if one thing fails, there's 10 other things that can fill the gap. And the way that modern society and human society has gone is in the exact opposite direction of that. So we have this hyper-efficient kind of, where everything, there's just one thing. So you get away from all the extraneous noise and you just have this one person does one job and you're all in a line and da-da-da. And the problem with that is that if one of those lines in the link fails, the whole thing goes down, which I think is what we sort of started to see. Nature does something quite different, right? It has just this incredibly crazy, messy interlinking and lots of things that can do similar jobs. So if one thing fails, something else can take its place. And that kind of idea is what we need to be cultivating. And that's what you're talking about, I think, Jackie, the kind of diversity of crops in different spaces. And one of the reasons why that works so well.
Are providing our bananas, that they can grow their own food alongside that. So again, it's not that monoculture, that field is grown for the needs of the local people and not just purely for our benefit. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of stuff that I won't get into, but about how, there's lots of countries that grow the food there that is then exported. So the export market is, you've got people in those countries who don't have enough to eat while they're exporting food to kind of Western markets. And yeah, so there's lots of serious issues, which is why I'm basically advocating a more localized, but not entirely local, a more localized way of growing food. But I'm open to that. We're very much trialing this, we're giving it a go, we're looking at how it works, and then if it doesn't work, where can we tweak it, where can we kind of make changes to make what we're doing better. I think we're just seeking to try to do things better. Yeah. Is that everything? Okay, great. If anybody would like to get in touch with me or learn more about it, I haven't actually got anything up on the internet yet, but there will be something. So we're going to have a website and probably a Facebook page dedicated to the farm, but we're not quite there yet. But if anybody is interested, I'll just hang around and I can give you my email address or, yeah. But there will be something going up on the Auckland Project website at some point in the future. Yeah.